Thanks a lot for the introduction, and I don't know if Julio's here, but I wanted to thank him as well. I'm going to be making this presentation, a review of global ART guidelines, benchmarking treatment as prevention, and I call it a wiki presentation because I'm hoping that you all will see errors and actually send in new guidelines and these sorts of things. The other thing I wanted to say is that actually this is the work of Soumya Gupta, who came to me as a volunteer from the Delhi School of Economics, and we tortured her by making her or helping her do this review, and she did a great job. And she's actually looking for a job, so if you need her, she's there. Look, I can't get started without a Canadian joke. I come from California, and so, you know, we're south of the border, and we like to do a little dig for the friends north of the border. And I thought this was great. What part of Canada that I know nothing about are you from? So from our Canadian neighbors, I thought that was good for you. It says a lot about our relationship between our countries. So that went over well. So the talk's really, I'll go through background, I'll talk about our methods, I'll review briefly the 72 countries, then we'll focus down on the 28 countries, and then we'll go to a conclusion. And what we did was we benchmarked to the WHO 2010 ART guidelines, and most of you are very familiar with them, less than 350. For TB, it's irrespective of CD4 count. And then in those guidelines, we have no recommendations on these issues there in the table. However, in this review, we did look at serodiscordant couples as well. And we're doing the pregnant women review as I talk. Our objectives, we went out and we scoured the bushes and got 72 guidelines, thankfully or unthankfully. There was a lot. And then we reviewed them using a standard abstraction form. And this slide is super busy and is against all rules for a presentation. I just wanted to show, there's a lot of countries. It's 72. And the years are all over the map. I mean, we used only things that were published and that we could get our hands on the web and that were official. We were surprised, actually. There are about 18 countries that actually have guidance above 350, and if you include the serodiscordant couples. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail. But again, and you see, it ranges from the United States to Italy to China and Zambia and these places. And here's the first table. We're looking at ART initiation among asymptomatic people, and you can see that there's a large group of countries in the 350 box. There's also a group of countries that are actually below 350 at less than 200. And the goal is actually to move those countries, or if the local circumstances, if they want to adapt, move them up to in concurrence with the WHO guidelines. And if you look at it in terms of a timeline, I think it's good to see it in this perspective. The countries below the timeline are in concurrence with WHO guidance. The countries above were actually not in concurrence, and we're actually providing ART earlier. So you can see that this is a moving process. And we'll be adding to this when we come out with the 2013 guidelines. Some countries will be ahead of us and some will be behind us in terms of concurrency. So we thought that it was interesting to take a look at this in terms of GDP. And this was not surprising to us that you see a correlation. So up in the upper right-hand corner, you see the United States, which has gone to everybody irrespective of CD4 count. And down here, you see a number of countries that are still at 200 or less than 250. And there's a slight correlation, more GDP, higher eligibility criteria, or easier access, as it were, using CD4 counts. The other thing, though, about this graphic that I think for me says is that, well, look, it's not just GDP, because you have countries that are along the same GDP line that actually have very different guidelines. So we're going to do a regression analysis, look at this and see what some of the factors are. But clearly there's a wide range there of initiation criteria. And this is looking at serodiscordant couples. And again, you have a number of countries that are out ahead of us. We just released our guidelines. And you have some other ones that are considering it and are moving in that direction. And again, the idea is to move everybody up into, I guess in concurrence with the WHO guidelines, which now say that you should provide it irrespective of CD4 count. And here is looking at HIV/TB, and it's irrespective of CD4 count for this as well. And here we would like the countries that are in blue to move towards the, I guess that's kind of an orange color, providing ART irrespective of CD4 count. So we have the 72 guidelines, and it's really basically all over the world. And now we decided to focus down on the 28 high burden countries, which account for 85% of the global TB/HIV burden. and also 74% of new infections and 80% of the gap in ART. And you see we bring these countries together. So this gives us a little bit tighter denominator rather than the other, which is more opportunistic in terms of the guidelines that we could find. And here we see what's going on in terms of ART in asymptomatic folks. And the dark blue is actually concurrence with WHO guidelines. And you can see there are a number of countries that are actually not in concurrence and actually would need to come up to less than 350 to be in concurrence. And this is looking at HIV/TB. And again, there are a number of countries that need to actually move up and provide ART irrespective of CD4 count. So I hope you're getting a sense that there's a lot of actually policy work that needs to be done in terms of benchmarking, in terms of adaptation. And when you look at the 28 countries, so a little bit surprisingly to us, there are a number of them that actually do have guidelines regarding serodiscordant couples. And so that's actually quite interesting. And then there are a whole raft of other countries that don't have that and will need to consider our new guidelines in terms of adapting their policy. I wanted to also put this in. This is a slide borrowed from folks at PEPFAR looking at B+, and this is another analysis that's ongoing with us. But we're looking at where people are in terms of using A, B, and B+. And this just gives a sense that there is movement in this area as well as countries kind of move towards B and move towards B+. So in terms of limitations, that was very fast, the talk will be available to everybody. We'll be publishing it just very similar like what we published with the research trials that we did after the last conference. We'll be publishing this so that people can have access to it. Of course, the guidelines may be outdated. They're in the process of being updated. So we always get people that come up after this talk and say, hey, but you got Tanzania wrong, you got South Africa wrong, and that's great. We just need to get those guidelines. And then the written policies definitely don't reflect program implementation, and most of you understand that very well. And then there may be other guidelines that we actually missed. So in conclusion, we have asymptomatic people living with HIV. There are 40 of 72 countries that are at the less than 350. We have 6 countries that are less than 500. United States has gone to everybody irrespective, and you have 12 countries that are looking at serodiscordant couples, and that's not including Rwanda and China are moving in that direction. But this is, I think, significant that no countries actually really consider sex workers, IDUs, or men who have sex with men as a potential criteria for, at least in their guidelines, as a potential criteria for ART. So in terms of recommendation, the first thing is obviously, countries again are sovereign, so they can have the guidelines that they want and need, but we think that at least people should consider moving towards less than 350 for asymptomatic, for serodiscordance irrespective of CD4 count, for people with TB irrespective. And then the other thing to consider is we have a couple policy options here in terms of accelerating earlier access to TasP. And one is a kind of a comprehensive approach. Okay, so do we just, when we do the guideline review next year, do we just raise the criteria up to 500 or something that allows a broad spectrum of people to have access to ART, or do we do a targeted approach? And it's not an either or, you can actually do both, and many countries are actually using both as an approach to providing earlier ART. So I wanted to leave maybe this one will go over a little bit better, I don't know. This is a guy that has, he's doing a talk on things my cats do, and he says to his wife, any word back from the TED conference? And I thought that kind of captured my talk on some level. So in other words, I don't expect a call from TED soon. Thank you for your patience.